Hello, my name is Ashante Horton, and I am the NCSS Conference Services and Education Manager, standing in for Anna Post, who is running our Summer Leadership Institute. Welcome to the NCSS C3 Collaborative Literacy Professional Development webinar, Developing Your Own C3 Lesson. This webinar, along with others in our series, are a part of the College Career and Civic Life Framework for Social Studies State Standards Literacy Collaborative, or C3LC, which NCSS is implementing in collaboration with the National Center for Literacy and Education and is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The goal of this initiative is to create and operationalize a plan designed specifically for social studies teachers to implement the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts by utilizing the C3 framework. And tonight I am pleased to introduce Dr. Michelle Herzog, NCSS's 2014 through 2015 President and Consultant 3 in the History Social Science Los Angeles County Office of Education. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
I appreciate you giving the time to devote to this particular webinar today. As Ashante mentioned, you heard about the goal of the collaborative. There's a number of webinars that have already been produced to take teachers through the various steps toward implementing the C3 framework, something we're very excited about. Hopefully you've had a chance to see up till now some of our other webinars, more introductory webinars, overviews of the C3, and then drilling down into each of the 4 different dimensions. This particular webinar is designed to really introduce you to a C3 lesson template that was developed, and just to kind of give you a glimpse on how it was developed and how you might utilize it to adapt an existing social studies lesson you have or for creating a new one. And I'm so thrilled and honored, hugely honored to see we've got some experts listening in. Mary Ellen Daniels and Rebecca Balbuena have used the template and the C3 in a number of ways, so they're very well situated and experienced with this. So hopefully they can add into our chat room and provide some ideas as well. Okay, so I'm going to go briefly through some basic introductory pieces, not knowing the background knowledge of our audience here. Like I say, there's a previous webinar you can look at that gives a full introduction, but let's just review briefly what the goals and the shifts are for the C3. As you probably already know, the objectives are to enhance the rigor of social studies, really want to focus and drill on those critical thinking, problem solving, and participatory skills because young people need those if they're going to be engaged citizens. And of course, there's the option to align to the Common Core state standards. Many of our states are working toward that, others not so much, but that's an available option for you as you move your work forward. What's our most exciting and important goal here? We want young people to study civics, economics, geography, and history to become active and engaged citizens. That's our outcome, that's our goal. And you'll notice it's not just teaching history or econ or geography or history, it's all of them combined. Just to refamiliarize you again, we're looking at the 4 dimensions of the C3 framework. This is a really great pedagogy and often a shift for some, but most of you, I doubt that. Dimension 1, as we know, starts social studies with a compelling question, something that's going to grab kids' attention, something that's intellectually meaty, but also neutral and is going to spark a lot of research and investigation. Of course, now in some places they call these essential questions or big idea type questions. Terminology may change, but I think you get the sense of that. Of course, we want to follow up with constructing supporting questions and identifying some resources to help. Once we've got the questions, we want to dig into the content and find the answers. And I think social studies folks are pretty good at doing this, but here again, we want to focus on all 4 of these subdisciplines. And of course, we don't want to forget our others as well, philosophy, psychology, the other humanities. And I'm sure you found a lot of ways to integrate the arts and science and even mathematics. This is a really new approach, I think, for a lot of folks, getting us out of those little silos. Dimension 3, of course, we're going to take all those multiple sources, and I think this is what social studies folks are really good at. And we want to look at multiple perspectives. We want kids to evaluate them. We want them to come up with some claims and then defend a claim using evidence. You see this idea all the way through the Common Core. So that we don't want people just talking for talking's sake. They got to have some proof, some evidence to back that up. And finally, dimension 4 is making that time and that space for young people to communicate those conclusions. We're so used to having them do that through maybe a test or a writing or an essay, but there's a lot of creative ways for them to do that. And here's the big piece that we're excited about. It's that taking informed action. This is a really exciting piece and something we often don't take the time to do. What this is really driven by is the need to apply what they're learning in the real world. It can be a huge taking action. You know, if you're studying about immigration rights of the past, it might be then transferring that to examining immigration policies today and having kids getting really civically engaged and reaching out to legislators and policymakers and petitions and all that meaty civic stuff that we enjoy. Or it could be host a forum or share your ideas with colleagues or teachers or create some pamphlets. It can be a lot of different things. And so really these are the kind of the guiding principles that exist that really kind of is reshaping social studies for a lot of people as we know it. Inquiry being at the center. This is what we love about social studies. It often prompts more questions than answers. And that's okay, because life should do that too. And so we really want inquiry to be at the center to spark that really, that great piece of curiosity. Here again, this emphasis on disciplinary integrity. So these are not social studies light. This is deep content learning in these 4 areas to be interdisciplinary and interdisciplinary with reading, writing, speaking, listening, and all our other subject areas, and really touching on all of that. You know, in some states, the standards read very heavy on history, but very light in geography, economics, and civics. We want to balance those scales because you can't teach any event in the past or the present unless you're looking at all those aspects. We're going to look at an example of that. The third guiding principle, as we know, is this whole idea of informed action and applying knowledge to make that front and center, to make it clear, to make it pertinent, and hopefully we'll answer that question we hear from our students and kids of our own if we have them. Why do we got to learn this stuff? Hopefully that will be answered for them. So that's an important one. And here again, this inquiry arc being an instructional arc, a whole frame for teaching and listening, teaching and learning. So the first question before we start planning lessons is this an instructional shift for you? That's the first thing. You got to look deep inside the way you teach, the way you think about teaching social studies, and have that conversation. Many of these things will sound very familiar, I suspect. Some might be a stretch. So before we dive into this and start creating lessons, I want you to think about real deeply, are any of these things shifts for you? Because what shifts for one may not be shifts for another. I know Rebecca and Mary Ellen, they've been teaching like this long before the C3 was mentioned anywhere. So, but I'm sure a lot of you know about this too. We'd love the whole field to be teaching in these exciting ways. Okay, so you might want to stop at this point, have a little discussion if you're watching this in archive. I also want you to feel free to put some comments up here in the chat box so we can have a little interactivity here too. Oh, there we go. Here's some typing going on. So thinking about some of this as potential shifts or adjustments for you. So we'll just keep that kind of going. So let's talk about these lesson plan templates. So we created 4 different lesson plan templates. I'm going to give you time to look at them a little closely. One for grades K through 2, grades 3 through 5, grades 6 through 8, and grades 9 through 12. And if you see this URL at the bottom here, this is my History Social Science website, C3 Framework website at my office, the Los Angeles County Office of Ed. You can download them there if you're watching this as an archive piece. If you're watching live, you can see at the bottom left corner, you'll see a box that says resource materials, and you can You can highlight any one of these you want, go up to the little square where it says pod options. I don't know if you can see this or not. And download these and save to your desktop as we're going through this webinar. And we purposely put them in Word doc format so that they're usable. Okay, so I see people are typing, but I'm not. Oh, there we go. Here we go. Here's Sandra Street, teaching middle school. Great, plans with her English language arts teacher. Gee, what a phenomenon. We wish everybody had the opportunity to do that. That's great. Here's Kevin talking about inquiry at the center. But here's that age-old question, never enough time to cover everything. Exactly. This is the big struggle we're all facing. If I go deep the way I really want to, I'm never going to get to the content I'm expected to cover. These are really tough decisions. I don't want to, slight them, but if any of the rest of you have ideas or clues on how to address that, go ahead. My advice usually is to have a conversation early in the year and be strategic. Figure out which areas, which topics you want to go deep, which you can go light. You obviously can't go deep in everything and be expected to cover it. Okay, let's go on and let me open up the template and show it to you and see how we design these and why there's 4 different ones, for heaven's sakes. All right, so I know this is small font, so I'll just kind of talk through it with you. If you opened up the C3 framework to Dimension 1, you would find that very first page on constructing compelling questions. And if you're familiar with the framework, you'll know that there are indicators there that describe very discreetly what is the expectation for students by the end of grade 2, by the end of grade 5, by the end of grade 8, by the end of grade 12. So the example we're going to walk through is an 8th grade template. So with that in mind, let me tell you how we put these together. So you'll notice this oval here. We copied all of the indicators all the way through the C3 that have the expectations for kids by the end of grade 8, and we put them in a single document. So let me show you. We pulled this, as you see it. On the next page of Dimension 1, we pulled this oval section and this, and then we threw them into one page. So here's the template. Here's the lesson plan template for grades 6 through 8. All right, so I hope that makes sense. Because my thinking was, if you're a teacher wanting to use the C3, it's really cumbersome to have to leaf through the whole book to find the things for your grade level. Why not pull out the sections for each of these grade bands and put them in one document to make it much more user-friendly to use and go through? So that was kind of the philosophy behind the format of putting that together. Okay, so that's what it looks. This is the page for Dimension 1 template, grades 6 through 8. All right, here's another example. Dimension 2, here again, pulled all the information out of this column by the end of grade 8 around civic and political institutions, around participation and deliberation. You see this is the title at the top. And processes, rules, and laws. Copied and pasted all of those sections and stuck them on one page. So if you're a teacher in grade 6, 7, or 8, you've got one thing you can go to, all right? You don't have to be flipping through the whole C3 framework, all right? So on and so forth. I won't take you through the whole thing, but hopefully you get the idea. When you go to economics, did the same thing. Pulled out everything for grades 6 through 8, stuck it on one page. Geography, did the same thing. History, same idea. All of these are 6, 8. Okay. And so we did this same thing, just so you know, in the K-5, in the 9-12, and the 3-5-2. Okay. Dimension 3, on the left side column here are C3 indicators, grades 6 through 8 for Dimension 3, and added a column for the description to go with it. Dimension 4, as you know, communicating conclusions and taking informed action. There it is, everything, one spot for grades 6 through 8, all right there. So that's what we have there. Here's another page that goes to that. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'd like to move forward a little bit and show you kind of a process for creating a lesson using that template for grades 6 through 8. Oh, wonderful. Oh, I'm glad you're able to do that. Terrific. Great. People are able to download. Terrific. Okay, so here's the lesson we're gonna work on. Now, this is the tricky as a presenter, not knowing my audience. I mean, some of you may be kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. So I tried to choose something kind of right in the middle, something typically done in middle school, and it's this topic right here, the Mexican-American War. So we're going to I'm going to walk you through a process for using the template, creating a lesson on the Mexican-American War, and going through the different dimensions, and hopefully it might help you see how this works. But knowing that we are all not experts on the Mexican-American War, we want to give ourselves a little background information first. So let's give ourselves a break and do a little refresher. All right, so take a minute and read this description, and then I'm going to show you a brief video that also will give you some background knowledge. Okay, so I found this little video clip, and it was done by, looks like a teacher who was creating a review YouTube for his students for AP US History. And I'm going to mute my mic, and it's about 5 minutes, and I'm going to ask Ashante to show that to you.
Hey, what's going on in AP World? We have the Mexican-American War review video for you today. It's a very important war in U.S. history. A few things you need to know about it. I will cover them all, everything you need to know for your APUSH exam. All right, to understand the Mexican-American War, we have to go back a little bit to this idea of manifest destiny. This is a very important idea that you will need to be familiar with if you're not already. It is the belief that the U.S. had a mandate or a direction from God to expand from coast to coast. Here is a very famous painting of Manifest Destiny. You see lots of people in their Conestoga wagons moving out west, and there's an angel above them kind of guiding the way. So many Americans believed during the mid-1800s that America had the God-given right to expand from coast to coast, and this is going to lead to issues, as we will see. And the South generally favored westward expansion, and they did so because there would be more land for them, and they could spread slavery further out west. And okay, some events that are leading up to the Mexican-American War. We're going to start with the election of 1844. One of my favorite presidential elections. We have Henry Clay over here, the Whig candidate. This is the third time he runs for the president and loses all three of them, very sadly. And he's going up against a dark horse candidate, or a candidate that nobody really saw coming, and that was James K. Polk, who was a Democrat. His nickname was Young Hickory because he was Andrew Jackson's protege. Polk embraced the idea of manifest destiny. He was all about it, did not hide from it, and he was in favor of the annexation of Texas. Henry Clay was flip-flopping on the issue of Texas, whether or not Texas should join the Union. And for that reason, he pretty much lost the election of 1844. Sadly, James K. Polk wins. We have something called the Slidell Mission. What James K. Polk does is he sends a guy by the name of Slidell, believe it or not, to purchase California, to go to Mexico to purchase California and help settle the boundary dispute along the Texas border, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Mexico refuses to even hear this guy talk. He sends him back, and Polk failed in his hope of purchasing California. On April 25th, 1846, Mexico attacks U.S. troops on U.S., quotes, soil. And if you look at this map here, here's Texas. Now, when Texas declared independence, the yellow is pretty much what Mexico recognized as the Texas border. The green area is all this disputed territory claimed by both Mexico and Texas. The U.S., when they annexed Texas, for the most part, assumed that all the green was part of them as well. So where this happens, this Mexico attacking the U.S. troops on the U.S. soil, happens right between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande River. What Mexico said was the Nueces River would be the southern boundary for Texas, and Texas said no, the Rio Grande would. So all this green area is the disputed territory. So where Mexico attacked was in between these two rivers on disputed territory. This leads to some people in Congress to want to know the exact spot of where this attack was, and most notably was Abe Lincoln. He kind of made his name. He was a freshman member of the House of Representatives, and he wanted to know the exact location of where the war started. A very important battle that you will need to know is the Battle of Buena Vista. This is where General Zachary Taylor becomes a hero, and then this helps catapult him into the presidency in 1848. And sadly, this is also where Henry Clay's son dies, Henry Clay Jr., in this battle. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ends the Mexican-American War, and the U.S. gains a lot. They gain California, areas of modern-day New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Nevada, and which is half of the Mexican territory. And if you look here, again, this gray area is what Texas had already claimed, but all this dark gray area here is from the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And then we're going to have a little issue over here in the Compromise of 1850. Texas is claiming this area here. So if you want to know more about this, watch my video on key compromises in U.S. history you need to know. And the U.S. pays Mexico $15 million. Now, if you want to know about this little bit of land called the Gadsden Purchase, check out Jimmy Fallon's skit. Just Google Jimmy Fallon Gadsden Purchase. They also do a little bit on the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. It is about 5 minutes of some of the funniest stuff you'll ever see on TV. And watch this guy's face the whole time. He makes weird faces. Okay, some effects of the war. America, the size of America is increased by 1/3. So again, all this land that they gained, and pretty much now the U.S. has expanded from coast to coast. They fulfilled their destiny of manifest destiny. Future generals emerged from this war, including this guy Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee, who will face off against each other during the Civil War. The debate over slavery continues. It intensifies. And one of the most important things you'll need to know is the Wilmot Proviso. This Democrat from Pennsylvania, David Wilmot, introduces this bill or amendment to a bill that says any land gained from Mexico should be free of slavery. And this is going to just set off a firestorm in Congress. And the South is going to hate this, never ever passes Congress. But it does. Its ideas are taken by a political party called the Free Soilers. And then we have the Compromise of 1850, which I touched on a little bit earlier. This is going to settle the admission of all that land. Basically, they're going to introduce popular sovereignty, or the idea that the people in the territories can vote whether it will be slave or free. Again, if you want more info on the Compromise of 1850, check out my video, Key Compromises in U.S. History. Okay, that's it for the Mexican-American War. If you're ever in Illinois and you want to see Santa Anna's leg, he was the Mexican general and leader during the Mexican-American War. His leg was actually stolen by an Illinois regiment in a battle. So here's his wooden leg. True story, when he lost his real leg, it was in 1837, I believe, he actually had a funeral for his leg. So this guy was a bit of an egomaniac. But if you're ever in Illinois and want to see his leg, there you go. And to see this video and many more, please visit apushReview.com. If you have not already subscribed, please do so. Tell all your friends. Put it on Twitter. Please share this with people in your classroom. I will greatly appreciate it. I appreciate you watching. And if you have any questions, let me know. Have a good day, guys.
Okay, so there you go. Everything you wanted to know or didn't want to know about the Mexican-American War. I love that he has the piece about the funeral of the leg. Thank you, Shante. So that's just a little background knowledge. Okay, so let's go back to the template, if we can. You remember, Dimension 1, these are all of the indicators over here for 8th grade. And so we're going to want to think about a compelling question to get kids excited about learning about the Mexican-American War. So this is tricky for us because, you know, if you're a history nerd like most of us are, man, just the idea of studying it sounds exciting. You don't need a reason. But sadly, our students, not so much. So we want to think about what are we going to do to get kids excited about this topic. We also want them to understand the importance of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo because that had huge implications on the geography plus of the United States. So if we go back to here and we think about how can we make this compelling, how can we capture the key ideas, where do we find points of agreement? One example, and you can see this in the column application, do treaties matter? Might be a good compelling question. Does it matter if we make an agreement over something? Why do we make agreements? What are treaties? What was the importance of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? What happened in Mexico after the war? Was the United States justified in those actions? Those would be really interesting supporting questions to get to that bigger question on, do treaties matter? So Kevin's asking, do we develop the compelling question or do students? So that's a question. That's a great question, Kevin. Comes up all the time. You need to think about that as well. A lot of things can enter into that. Ideally, we would love for kids to have enough background knowledge where they're coming up with compelling questions. I certainly would be open to that and think it would be great. But in a lot of places, you may need to frame that compelling question for them, particularly younger kids. It's kind of, most of our elementary folks will say it's more useful if a teacher can come up with that and see if that can spark some supporting questions. Some will say, let the kids ask all the questions from start to finish. But I don't know, my experience says they got to have some type of background or context to know what they're going to be asking about. So here again, that's a very subjective. I'm not giving you a good answer, Kevin, I'm afraid. But obviously, the more we can get kids into that inquiry mode and asking, absolutely the better. All right, so there's some things. We might throw in here in this last column, what are the common core connections here? All right, and I like the comment early on by Jim, who talks about classifying common core as foundational, supportive, or vital. If you're going through an exercise like that, you're going to want to have that close at hand, because those certainly can tie into that. All right, so here's how we could use Dimension 1 using the template. Let's go to Dimension 2. Dimension 2 was about civics. One thing you might want to do first is go through, and I apologize, the font is small here. You may have trouble looking at it. But since these are all the 6 through 8 indicators, go through this, highlight the ones you think are important that you need to cover. And then from there, see how you can apply that to this topic. So for example, civics talks about distinguishing the powers and responsibilities of citizens, political parties, and interest groups. Well, we certainly saw that in the dilemma over the Mexican-American War and how things were progressing. So examine the powers and responsibilities of the U.S. and Mexican generals, the political figures. What was their power? What was their responsibility in negotiating these disputed territories? What was the purpose and impact of the treaty on relations, political relations between the U.S. and Mexico? Those would be good things to figure out. What's the role of political organizations in shaping people's lives as a result of the war? And what's the relevance of personal and governmental interests when nations, states, or communities enter into treaties? These are pulled, these can be drafted from the language in this blue section to help frame it in the context of the Mexican-American War. Okay? Going forward, economics. You can certainly see the economic implications of this period of history. In this C3 slide, 6A, talks about how economic decisions affect the well-being. Well, there were certainly some economic incentives for acquiring land from Mexico, as you know. We want to highlight that, not just the political, geographic, but what was the economic incentive? And we know by gaining California, we know what's going to happen in California right around that time. Gold is discovered. I'll bet you that people had their eye on that. Perhaps I have to go back and look at the timeline for sure. Analyze the impact of the treaty, economic impact on the U.S. Now you'll notice here, struggled a little bit, not as many economic indicators in this particular subject area, but that's okay. Some are going to lend themselves better to others. Okay. Oh, good. Jim's reminding us too. Great document from National Geographic that aligns the Common Core to the National Geography standards. Yeah, that's a great piece, Jim. I think that good. Can't think. Beth Ratway, I think, is the one who worked on that, if I'm not mistaken, and modeled after the one we had did where we aligned civics to Common Core. Great piece. All right, let's go on. Geography. Oh my God, this thing just reeks of geography implications, this topic. when you're looking at explaining relationships between location and places and regions, changes in the environment, using mapping and graphing skills, cultural patterns and economic decisions influencing environments, how people interacted, the relationship between humans, all of these things were impacted before the war, during the war, and certainly after the war as a result of the treaty and that. Okay, thank you for reminding me. The goal is 1849. I should have remembered that, the 49ers, of course. Good timing, huh, that they got California right before that. Obviously, Jim and our geographers out there would love, this is a great way to bring maps out, and this is just a couple examples. I'm sure you've got plenty. But think of how exciting it would be to put a map like this out. Here are the disputed lands in 1846, and here we are, the present-day boundaries between Mexico and U.S. You could have a lot of rich discussion around that, to be sure. All right, let's go on to history. Here's the indicators in grades 6 through 8 if you're teaching this in those grades. Look at connections among events and developments in the broader context. Classify events and developments. Explain multiple causes and effects of events. Relative influence of, you know what I'm talking about. All of these great historical indicators looking at historical sources, evidence, limitations, how people's perspectives influenced information. All of that can be applied in the context of this lesson as you see in those lower boxes by analyzing the cause and effect relationship between the U.S. and Mexico before, during, and after the war, multiple perspectives about the causes and consequences, the importance of the treaty, and obviously its impact on land use, boundaries, and relationships. So we're just highlighting those areas in C3 we want to capture, contextualize it for the Mexican-American War and the treaty, and plug it into that lesson. Okay, moving on to Dimension 3. I think this is our most exciting piece. This is the part where we gather sources, we analyze multiple perspectives. I think we're pretty familiar with that. And here's just an example of a few primary sources that you could grab and put in front of kids to go through that exercise, which is a very interesting exercise I think we're all good at. So here's an example. So I found this on the website, and this is an interpretation of the Mexican-American War according to some American textbooks. And just to save us some time, I want you to look at this interpretation and pay attention to where kind of the perspective of it from an American point of view. Polk knew that the vast region, which now includes California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, contained very few Mexicans, although it was part of Mexican soil. There seemed to be little chance that Mexico would be able to fill it with settlers. They offered to buy that broad and almost empty country for a good price, and also to relieve Mexico, I love that use of that term, relieve Mexico from paying any more of old claims of Americans against the government. The government of Mexico, though poor, was too proud to sell. They even refused to listen to the plan. There you go. There's an early American textbook version of that story. In fact, here is a poster that was put out, to a broadside, to encourage Americans to join the fight against Mexico. And we've seen a lot of examples of different pieces of propaganda, particularly in wartime. And you could see a lot of that kind of language. All right, just to be fair, because that's how we want to do, let's look at a version of a Mexican textbook describing that same period. See if you can pull out a different perspective from there. Here's some more long. Mexico lost in this war a third of her territory. The rich acquisition of the United States is not going to erase the blot of inequity which has been written into the pages of our history by this invasion. So they call it an invasion. So I'm sure you've been through this exercise with kids before, but here's just another example. Two different perspectives on the same event, And you know, we love to mess with kids' minds because then they'll come to you and say, so tell me what really happened, Ms. Herzog. And I'm like, that's up to you to decide. You can help us figure that out and provide evidence. So now we get up a conclusion. We're looking at a conclusion to construct those arguments with claims and evidence from these different sources. We want to give explanations. We've highlighted this. And here's how we're going to apply it in this particular example. By answering the questions in that third column. What were the factors that led to the war? Based on those different perspectives, provide evidence for both if you can. What influenced the outcomes of the war? What was the impact of the treaty? Was the U.S. justified in their actions? That's a great question to ask kids and ask them to provide evidence. And what I'd like to do is really find a way to apply it to events in today's world. So what are the implications in today's society? Do treaties matter? How do they impact the environment, the geography, the economics, the political relationships? We're seeing this in the news constantly. Look at Israel and Palestine, treaties, boundaries, political, economic, human elements and relationships. When people and government leaders are looking at drawing up agreements and treaties, are they looking at all of these aspects as carefully as they should? That's the big question. Those are the questions we want young people to engage and think about as well. And here you go. Look at the Common Core, site-specific textual evidence, supporting analysis, all of those things you would certainly want to include in that work. I love to have them then look at current events. This might be the stretch part for you if you have the time to get them into those things. Have them look at an issue that's important to them in the context of treaties or agreements or contracts. They're going to be entering the world and be facing a lot of those types of issues. Do they know to look at different perspectives when they're drawing up or engaged in a contract or agreement? Do we see local governments doing this kind of work, state, federal? What can we do to engage young people to engage in conversation, ask those questions? There we go. Here's another example. The water wars in the West. I live in California. This is very front and center. A lot of heated discussions going on where we draw our water from, who's affected, what are the agreements, what are the contracts, what's the language in those things that are going to impact people politically, economically, geography, and all of those things. That's what we're hoping to do with the C3 and with the lesson plan template to kind of help you move in that area. You don't have to start from scratch, of course. Look at what you're currently teaching and how you're teaching it, and maybe just reframe it or shape it into the template. The next page in the template is basically the same thing, just in a different format. And you're welcome to use the front part that we just went through or this back part or both, but it's basically the same thing, maybe in a little easier format. Compelling questions, dimension 1, just throwing stuff in there. Dimension 2, the same things in there. What does it mean around civics when we study the Mexican-American War and the treaty? What about economics, geography, history? So here again, just another example of how to use the template to just kind of find an easy place to put the information, resources, and guidance for your teaching. And here again, dimension 4, just copied and pasted in here. This is a little easier user format, if that's useful to you as well. Some people like to just dive right into those sections. And here again, dimension 4, this idea of communicating and taking action. And of course, we don't want to forget a very important piece of any lesson design, which is assessment. You might have caught another webinar we had with Bruce Van Sledwright that talked about qualified multiple choice and other forms of assessment. Certainly that needs to be part of your planning and your thinking as you design instruction. How are we going to ask kids to demonstrate knowledge along the way through formative? and then through summative. These are questions we're not going to deal with deeply at this point, but the template does give you that space to start taking notes and filling things in and making it in a concise, usable document for you. And of course, we wanted to create some space as well for you to throw in other ideas you might have, other materials, equipment, resources, anything else that might be useful to you. So that's kind of a quick run through on the lesson template and how to use it if you find it useful. I, for the first time, was teaching a methods course for elementary teachers and asked them all to use the template to write a lesson, and I was just thrilled. They caught on to it real quickly and seemed to find it useful and really came up with some engaging and interesting ideas. And I know Rebecca Valbuena has done one for us on voting for elementary students, and that sample is up and available, I think, on my website, but others as well. So I'm just going to end there and open up to questions and look at our chat room. And let's share some other ideas that you might have or questions you might have on tools that might be useful in reconstructing or readapting your work to the C3. Okay, D. Murray makes a point, grouping and differentiation strategies would be a good thing to include. Absolutely, yeah, I agree. Oh, okay, and Mary Ellen makes a good suggestion too. Build in another column on each of those steps where you could take notes of formative assessment pieces or summative at the end. That's another great suggestion, Mary Ellen. And since this is a Word doc, you can do that, of course. You're free to adjust it, use it in a way. My belief is if it's useful, great. If you can make it better for yourself, make it better. It's all good. So here's Rebecca. Okay. She found it to be a good tool for organizing, a menu for day-to-day lesson planning. So thanks, Rebecca. I'm glad you found that useful too. Oh, we have a PSYOP person. That's great. Many of you may not know this is some strategies that people are using to support our English learners. Yes, we did have Barbara Cruz, I think, did a webinar for us on supporting English learners. That'd be another good piece to include in there, and how to strengthen that. Adaptation, and we talked about differentiation as well, particularly for our students with special needs. Very important. So my question for Jim, I know you're a big geographer. Are there other tools there that you know of in the geography community that people are using to actually implement the C3 in their classrooms? I like Kevin's thought too, PSYOP and C3 blended together. I love that idea too, and would love to spend some more time trying to articulate that for teachers. I think that'd be very useful. So maybe, Kevin, maybe we work on something like that. Okay, great. Let's see if I can communicate later, Kevin. That sounds like a cool piece. So many of these things support each other, and I think would really help us kind of change that mindset that you have to teach all these subjects in silos. I'm glad we're at a place now, I think, in the general education circles that not necessarily so anymore. These things, we're talking about whole child, whole curriculum. So we'll just wrap up in a minute. I see people, I don't want to cut anyone off. I see people are typing away. And I'd love to know more, and I know NCSS as a whole would love to know if you find this useful, if you have some sample lessons, let's get them up and share them and see what's working. Of course, that's the whole goal of this collaborative work. But even beyond that, I think I'm excited about our New Orleans conference coming up and more people showcasing how they're using the C3 to really enliven their programs. My dream was to create kind of a big clearinghouse where we could have people post a bunch of these things too. I think it's very exciting. Okay, iCivics, well, that's great. And you've got a civic learning expert here with Mary Ellen Daniels. She's been a great resource. She's been on almost every one of these webinars. I've noticed Mary Ellen, and very involved in updating the Illinois standards. It should be a big hooray there, all revolving around the C3. C3 teacher site is another good one too. All right, well, I'm just going to wrap up right now. You know how to reach me. My email's in there somewhere. But I hope you continue to do great work and inspire your colleagues, and hopefully this template's been useful to you, and I just wish you all the best. So thanks for taking the time to be with me today. And thank you to Ashante for filling in for Anna. Hope you guys all are enjoying your summer and have a great start of the next school year.